Mr. Gephardt, would you like, Ms. Boomer, do you want to lead us here?
I was looking for get part on Channel 5.
Good evening. Yes, sir, Mr. Robinson. Thank you for the opportunity to come here and speak with the council and the folks that have come out to attend tonight. I'm with Tesoro Corporation, and what we're here to talk about is a pipeline that we're in the early stages of proposing. It would move waxy crude from the Uinta Basin to the Salt Lake City refineries. It's a common carrier line, so even though with Tesoro, when we're investigating it, it would be available for everybody that would be interested in shipping on it. So we have
Yes, sir. Just a brief question. Because it's a common carrier line, you said that the intent is to move waxy crude, but it's my understanding that you can move other substances through that line. Is that accurate?
I believe that is accurate, but that's not our intention. The intention is to build it for waxy crude movement. So what I'd like to do with y'all's permission is make this a collaborative session. Like I said, we're in the beginning stages, and we're out to inform, educate, and build relationships with the communities that we're going to be passing through if we move on this proposed route. So I'd like to just maybe use the PowerPoint screen as a reference. I'll talk through some of that, and then as questions pop up, please feel free to shoot them.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
I actually want to ask a question. Josh, have you received questions for
I've not.
this topic?
I've not, no.
Okay, I just want to give you the opportunity if it was made sense, I can.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No worries. So, like I talked about, we're thinking about initial sizing for this. We had to start with some basic parameters for engineering and design. So 60,000 barrels a day is the basis for the proposal right now. That could change. We're planning to go have, it's not a true open season in the terms, it's not FERC pipeline, but we would go and solicit the interest of the others who may want to ship on it to help inform what volume of barrels they would see shipping on it. And I think it's something important to note that it's barrels that are already would be shipping to Salt Lake City. These would not be new incremental barrels of this. It's based on
What's the maximum you could ship if you had others joining?
well, right, that would depend on the design. So
Would you increase the pipe diameter or increase the pressure?
we would look to again, it depends on what number we're looking at, but most likely we would look to increase the pipeline diameter and be able to accommodate additional barrels that way if it moved to a number that warranted scaling up in size.
I have it's probably a really dumb question, but I know nothing about this business, so I'm going to ask a college
No,
question.
yes, ma'am. No dumb questions, though. They're all
If the
good.
intent is for it to be used for waxy crude, and you had a carrier who didn't use waxy crude, could the same pipe have waxy crude at some part of the day and a different something at another part of the day?
Let me ask one, I didn't follow 100%. So if we have, if it's designed for waxy crude, but...
And you had a common carrier
Yep.
who doesn't use waxy crude.
Yes, ma'am.
Could that common carrier use this pipeline at the same time as you or on the same day with two different, one being waxy crude and one being something else?
So physically, it would be possible, I mean, inside the pipe from a fluid dynamics perspective, but we're looking to size this and build this for waxy crude, and all 5 of the refineries in Salt Lake City are already using waxy crude. So it would be designed to move the waxy crude from the Uinta Basin. We're not looking to design it for other materials.
Is waxy crude, is the design for waxy crude the biggest design? Well, first of all,
Yeah.
let's go back.
Yes, ma'am.
What's another thing that could go in it besides waxy crude?
Water.
Water. No, any other kind of crude?
No, I mean, any fluid, any liquid.
All right, so, all right, give me an idea what a common
So
carrier
if they decided to reopen the refinery in the Uinta Basin and actually refine gasoline, you could do gasoline through the pipeline, couldn't you?
That's a great distinction. It's typically going to be a crude pipeline or a finished products pipeline, but you won't find the two of those commingling. So,
Is gasoline a finished
and
product?
gasoline, diesel, anything that's kind of post-refining, that's typically a segregated system to keep it clean. You want to do that for product quality and specs. The crude oil would be a little bit different than that. But Ms. McMullen, what I think, the common carrier question, what that means is not on a product basis, but that it's open for all parties who desire to ship on it. So it's not about the products. When we say common carrier, it's available. It's not a proprietary line that would be just for one or two companies that decided to build it for their exclusive use.
But it's, okay, what I'm trying to get at is, I understand that it's not exclusive to one or two companies, what I'm trying to get at is what kind of other products.
So, let
What
me give
other-
you an example.
Yeah, go ahead.
So let's say that for some reason, this big discovery of non-waxy crude, doesn't have the paraffins that are out in the basin now. The waxy crude tends to solidify, it has a high condensation, or a high,
Pour plant.
yeah. It becomes a solid at a high temperature. Okay, so you have to heat it. This will be it'll be heated before it enters the pipeline, and there may be heating stations where the pipeline may have coils in it or something and run electricity through it to heat it. Okay, but let's say that there's a discovery of non-waxy crude, just regular old crude, that wouldn't need to be heated. It's a common carrier. XYZ Corp has a bunch of it. They either found it there, there's another pipeline that someone builds into the basin that they can hook onto you and then bring it in. That's more likely, but to do one day crude oil, the next day gasoline or diesel, you have to clean it.
That's right.
There's impurities. It's not something you're going to flip back and forth like that.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
Excuse me,
But
Lisa?
could you do waxy and petroleum crude?
Yeah,
You
that's the
should
same.
switch back and forth between waxy
It's all
and...
crude oil, it's just a question of how much wax it's got.
That- I
This
think that's your
pipeline has
question,
to be designed to deal with the wax, otherwise it just balls up. It solidifies, you can't move it.
My question
absolutely.
was a little broader than that, but I think that's the answer to the question. And my question was, what you were saying earlier, is what other products could be in the pipe?
Right.
It's designed for crude oil.
Correct.
In your case, waxy crude. It could accommodate non-waxy crude. But is there another product, not gasoline, not diesel, is there another product out there that we haven't talked about that could be in the pipeline?
Well, if you clean it out, you could put water in it, put any liquid in it.
Right.
In the future?
In the future,
Not all at
If
the
we
same
plan
time.
for it,
Yeah, yeah, okay.
The intent of the designed operation would be to transport crude oil. And
could you accommodate natural gas? It's not designed for those kind of pressures.
That's correct. This, it would not be a natural gas pipeline.
Well, keep going with your presentation.
Okay, thank you. So, and a good question. I think that there's some content that maybe we'll get to, and hopefully I'll address it a little bit more detailed, and if not, then definitely we can dive back into it. So the question, why build a pipeline? Right now, there's no existing suitable pipeline to transport this product, and that goes back to what Mr. Robinson was just talking about, which is the paraffinic qualities of waxy crude. It's a little bit different. The Chevron pipeline is not designed with insulation and heat to accommodate those with any significant volumes. So that's the only other crude pipeline out there now. We feel like it's safe and efficient. It's 250 tanker trucks equivalent. So directionally, there's about 240 barrels in a tanker truck with a trailer behind it. It's a 60,000 barrel a day capable pipeline, so it would offset the equivalent volume of 250 trucks if there were 60,000 barrels of waxy crude oil on the
Do
pipeline.
you have any idea what the current volume of, the actual current volume of trucks that you're seeing coming up 40 out of the basin?
It's getting into this neighborhood. The estimates of the daily use in Salt Lake City by the 5 refineries is probably 53 to 58,000 barrels of waxy crude daily.
So, just follow up on that question. 60,000 barrels is roughly what's going in over the road now.
Yes, sir.
So if we snapped our finger and this were built, in theory, those trucks would go away. Now, to the extent there's new production found, I mean, then the volume may increase. So you may handle 60,000 in this pipeline, and there may be a need for 80,000 to come in. So there may be another 20 that picks up again trucks. Unless someone does a phase 2 of this pipeline, or before you get through, you wind up making it 16 inch or 20 inch or something, and then capacity would increase.
That's correct. So 60,000 is based on what the current, approximate demand is in Salt Lake City because of the properties and the need to continuously flow the wax and crude. It's not a line where you would, build it for future capacity that doesn't have commitment that is going to be there. But you're absolutely right. Whatever the end volume is that would be coming into Salt Lake City, a 60,000 barrel a day pipeline would give you a net reduction of 250 trucks. So it could stay right around almost 0 trucks, or it could be a different number if that production volume and demand changes in Salt Lake City.
What are the relative economics between trucking and piping? Is it, for Rogers Oil Company, is it more expensive for me to hire a driver and run trucks, or more expensive to use the piping?
So we kind of feel that it's going to be on parity, because at the end of the day, the cost is going to, be near equivalent, or there would not, you won't have people switching to a more expensive transportation methodology. So this is kind of back to the question of, what is the waxy crude oil? It's from the Uinta Basin. It's important to note it is considered a conventional crude oil. It's not oil from tar sands. It's a high quality crude oil, and it's fairly clean to process. Lower metals, lower sulfur, lower emissions in the sulfur dioxide category. The challenge with this crude oil is that its transportation is a little bit different, because it does, solidify at room temperatures. So to address that, it does need to be heated at the origin. The black waxy crude solidifies somewhere in the 95 degrees Fahrenheit range. The yellow's around 115. So you would need to have the waxy crude stay above that to continuously flow. So we plan, in the initial concept, you heat it at the origin. It's about a 40-hour transit from origin to end of the line in Salt Lake City. As long as there's continuously flowing operations at 60,000 barrels a day, not intending to reheat it along the way. What we do have to provide for is a contingency. If it stops flowing, then what, right? And so that's kind of the two different technologies that we're exploring now. The first is heat trace. It's basically electrical on the outside of the pipeline. The pipeline's insulated. If flow stops and is perceived to be stopped for a while, we'll turn the switch on. It'll keep the waxy crude oil at a temperature where it remains liquefied. When we can start flowing again, the heat turns off, the pumps turn on, and the crude oil continues to move.
What happens if it gets stuck? What happens if the system breaks down and you don't know that it's solidified?
So with the heat tracing, the design would be that once it turns back on, it would take the solidified crude oil, liquefy it, and then it would be able to flow.
Is there a scenario where that doesn't work and the pipes explode?
They don't explode, you just have a big plug in your pocket.
That's correct.
And then you got a big problem.
Yeah, so it would, the explosion's not an outcome. It would have a plug, and then you would have to determine where that plug is, and then, assess how to remove that plug. And there's a few different technologies that can be employed for doing that. And it would just be on a case-by-case basis to determine.
Big long can. Yeah.
We call it pit. What is the beginning temperature? I mean, 135 miles, 40 hours, even the best insulation, you're going to dissipate some heat. So you start out at 250 degrees or 300 degrees, and you hope at the end you're above 115 for yellow. Or
So still designing and engineering what that final would be with actual bench test data and insulated pipeline to see how that performs. It's not near as severe as the numbers that you put out. We're estimating it's probably in the 140 to 160 range to start, and then that will allow for that 40-hour continuous journey and for it to flow. One thing we want to continue to talk about is pipeline safety, right? Safety is a hallmark and one of the basic principles that guide all our decision-making at Tesoro. So a few things to point out on, things that we're looking at. That's a smart pig on the cart right there. And so, smart pigs are something that are, great innovation and technology.
no, it's
They called it a pig because before the pig was smart, and we'll call it the pre-smart pig, right? There's other words that were maybe the pig wouldn't be happy being called, but it looked kind of like a pig. It was a big rubber piece, you put it in the pipe, you push it, and it was to clean and scrape the inside of the pipe. With innovation and microprocessing and technology, the Smart Pig now has the ability to do a lot of detection sensors as it runs through. It's measuring the thickness of the pipe 360 degrees, the entire length, and then as that's done on a cyclical basis, you really have a profile of the health of the pipe, primarily from a corrosion perspective, to understand if you have areas that are beginning to thin out, in a fashion that's not anticipated in the engineering design. And so it really tells you there's a potential issue developing well in advance of the problem actually arriving.
What's the pipe made of?
The pipe is steel pipe.
Steel.
And what are those cycles? How often would you run a smart pig?
The Smart Pig cycle will vary. It's probably in the 2 to 5 year range, depending on what segment of the pipeline and what the data is telling us and informing us on what needs to be done. A few other things to point out. The pipe design, innovative state-of-the-art techniques. Hydro testing is done before any oil goes in. The pipeline's filled with water. It's pressured up to 125 to 150% of the operating pressure to ensure that there's physical integrity. The wells are good, the pipe is good. So that happens on the front end before any oil is introduced to the pipe. We'll have remote control valves, so there'll be a 24/7 control center that's monitored. If anything is detected that's an anomaly, the valves will be shut down until a visual inspection and confirmation that everything is okay has been performed. The leak detection system basically measures flow rate between A and B, knows what passed A, what should pass B, and again, if the sensor gives you feedback that says something doesn't add up, then that would be a reason that we would stop flow to go and explore it and look into that. Visual inspections, this is basically driving or overflight, required 26 times a year, no more than 3 weeks between, and the only reason you would do it at an interval other than 2 weeks is if weather conditions just didn't allow access or flight ops if you were going to fly over it due to weather conditions and safety concerns.
What do you see by flying over?
You would see a leak if there was a leak on the pipeline that had not been detected by another method. You would have a visual indication of that.
Plus you also see whether someone's built a house or a barn or a shed on top of it.
That's correct.
And then they drill down into the pipe and suck it.
Yep. Yes, sir. Good point.
I've seen that before.
And then visual inspectors, sign markers, it would be a participant in the on-call program. As Mr. Muir said, it's called before you dig, right? So if somebody's in that area, they should be calling to make sure that somebody comes out and marks and shows, where the line is, depth, and everything is set up so that it can be safely executed. So a lot of state-of-the-art, cutting-edge safety and inspection techniques that would be a part of this design, build, and operation.
There's a little capsule they can pull behind that pig if you want to ride.
That sounds fun.
So, not for some counties. So, we can't pull anything behind with people.
It's a common carrier, we're allowed to put anything through it.
Subway time.
From where we are in next steps, we really are at the cutting edge of this. Tesoro, this pipeline project has been, banted around probably for 18 months to 2 years. Another organization was looking at it. They kind of said, hey, it feels like it's probably something that would be of interest to the refiners. And when we kind of saw the initial concept, we said, yeah, this is. We have a logistics business that Tesoro is continuing to develop. So we acquired the pipeline engineering and the preliminary study that had been done to date at the end of August of 2013. We filed a form with the federal government for utilization of federal lands for energy infrastructure pipelines and transmission lines. That's an SF-299 at the end of September. The Forest Service is the lead agency on this from the EIS perspective, and so that's where we just started into the EIS. We had open public town hall meetings last week, one in Heber City, one in Bountiful. And that's part of the EIS process. It was an opportunity for the communities to come out and we probably have between 80 and 100 people at each of those meetings both nights. And the EIS process is to to engage with the community, receive their feedback, and make sure that as we're thinking through the proposed route, that we're getting all the feedback, input, and local knowledge that we need to put in to make sure we're considering the best fit. I mean, our principles are that we want to minimize, impact to develop and major developed areas as well as the sensitive areas. And we want to maximize following existing right-of-ways or in the corridor of where existing utilities already are. So those types of things defined a little bit the initial preliminary line, but we're still on the early stages, and we'll continue to engage with county and city level government officials to make sure that we're having these conversations as we continue to define this pipeline.
What kind of feedback did you get from last week's open house?
It was a range. Candidly, probably the top 4 comments I overheard was, one, we love the idea of something that would take the truck traffic issue and take that to a smaller level. A lot of interest in where exactly does this go and how does it affect me? That's an expected question. There was a fair amount of comment about, hey, have you considered building a refinery elsewhere instead of bringing the crude to Salt Lake City? The fourth question, it was kind of all over the board, things that were personally of interest to the different folks that we had come and attend. I think we probably had from, Duchesne all the way to Salt Lake City. We had people that came up and as they're pointing to the line on the chart, they were represented from the whole length of the pipeline.
At what point in the process do you pick the route?
So the route is, so this EIS where we just started, that's probably a 12-month process to complete a draft EIS. We'll be getting input from that process from interested stakeholders and individuals. Then that will basically be put back out, the draft EIS for public review by the Forest Service for a 60-day period. And then they'll come back and they'll have a 45-day period to publish the final EIS and record of decision. That final record of decision will basically determine and define the final route.
But Phil, excuse me, that's right. Okay. But the EIS, how do they know what the EIS when you haven't determined your location yet? And give you an example. Is that the night I was over in Wasatch County, you guys are saying it's possible that we would go down Democrat Alley, all the way down to the middle of Peoria, down on the east side of Watershed Reservoir and down that way. Where the EIS statement would be different if you follow the Chevron pipeline, the existing pipeline all the way across, and there you already know what the EIS is on that pipeline. So how do you determine these things? I mean, who makes that decision?
So to that, there's 3 routes. There were more than 3 that started, 3 routes that made it to, primary and 2 alternates for the EIS process. For the 2 alternates, information that we discovered on why that we feel like the preferred route would be the way to go has been part of what was filed with that SF-299 filing in September of last year with the Forest Service. And then as we do the environmental impact studies on flora and wildlife, the feedback that comes in from the public comment period, that will all go in and be part of, okay, is there something that would disallow the preferred route to be the one that we wanted to use?
So do you have a preferred route right now?
We do.
And is that down the Democrat Alley, or is that which way is that?
It's the one that's described, I think, here.
Yeah, so we'll get to it, I'm sure.
And I'll pull the chart up in just a second.
So it is the one that goes down Democrat.
I was afraid.
It is, that's the one. So, pardon? What was that?
Just keep going, Mike.
So you can make changes, and those are just variations of.
Variations along that proposed route.
David, the pipeline's 4 to 6 feet deep, so you better have a big gun if you expect to shoot it. Keep going, Mike.
So, public involvement and outreach, and like I said, we had 2 open houses. We've been out and had a chance to speak with a lot of different, county and city level and state level, agencies and government representatives to just inform and educate. We're starting this pipeline and we're looking for feedback, right? And as we get to the next level of specifying what that route would be along that preferred corridor, as the right of way and the land folks are out, then that will be a continuing conversation and dialogue with the affected entities and parties. But we're really looking to make this collaborative. We're out in the community. Tesoro's refinery in Salt Lake City's been there since 1908. We've got several hundred people between our logistics business and our refining business that live in the community or community members. Their kids go to school, they're Little League, so we're not somebody coming in to look to build a pipeline and disappear. We've been in the community for a long time. We plan to be in the community for a lot longer. So this is one of the messages that we're wanting to get out in front of the different partners that will be impacted and participating along the pathway. Just to say, here's what we're looking at. We're at the early stages, and we're looking for feedback and conversation. To the earlier question, the red line is kind of what we would call the preferred route. And then the green line and the pale blue line are two additional alternative routes that were initially explored. And those three routes are what were filed in with the SF 299 back in September of last year. And then we wanted to just kind of have we had a map up, and for those of you that were able to attend one of the open houses, it was really from Duchesne all the way to Salt Lake City. Kind of took it and scaled down the step over here if you don't mind real quick.
I have a pointer if you'd like.
Oh,
Well, we have a rolled up version.
Well, yeah.
That's easier too.
Take this.
that'd be wonderful. Thank you.
Work.
It does. So the black line is the county boundary, and so this is really Summit County right here where the pipeline initially enters, and then the route and where it departs back at the western boundary of the Summit.
So help us understand what we're looking at here.
See, that's
That
probably had less than
that black line,
Go back to the other map, it's easier to,
well, these are national forest lands that show the dark green, right?
That's correct.
And so,
Wait, I'm sorry. The forest lands are kind of the salmon color.
they're the same color.
And then outside of that, these are private lands over in that area. That's right.
Chris, it enters the county right between Camas and Francis. Goes up and cuts down and that alley. Heads over to 32, seems to follow 32.
It does.
So leave the river, up the Lead River, Rockport, and then makes the turn, goes over.
That's right. So it kind of follows around Rockport on the Westar, second Westar line, and then it turns north from there. City manager is over
Okay, Cindy, let's keep moving on.
All right. So this was kind of it. The map and the route review was the final thing we wanted to be able to present. It's about 36 miles of the 135-mile proposed pipeline that passes through Summit County. So that was kind of what we wanted to share just as an overview. Again, the key message is early stages, and we think it's safe and a more efficient way to move it. And we're looking to be a community partner and collaborate throughout this process. And that's what we're here tonight, is to make sure that we're opening those dialogues up with this body.
So, Paul Harmon called me here the other day and said, what's the council want to hear about it? And I said, we want to hear what the pipeline is. We want to hear where it's going to go. We want to understand the timeline. We want to understand our involvement. What regulatory role or what milestones are there? So I don't think we've addressed adequately the last issue of this. Well, even the timeline, you said the EIS is going to take a year. Your pre-scoping ends on the 17th of this month?
Correct.
And so, who's here from the council, from the county staff? You're here still, Lisa and Pat? So, and is Leslie here hiding?
yeah. She's here.
Okay, so you guys need to determine whatever comments we have and submit them to, I guess, the Forest Service if it's acting as lead agency.
That's correct.
So, and you know where to do that, I assume? Okay, so, we'll do that, and then after that, 17th of March comes and goes, then what happens as far as the draft EIS will, the Forest Service will meet with other state, what's the right word, consulting parties?
Right.
Is the county a consulting party? The same way an Indian tribe would be in federal highways, or UDOT, or
Coordinating agency.
A
coordinating agency.
Yes.
Now, is that different than the consulting? My NEPA ask is a little rusty here. NEPA speak. What is the right term for a party that, with whom you have to consult by law? Coordinating agency.
Yes.
So does the county that has local jurisdiction fall under that, and the local government or some catch-all?
So
In addition to scoping. In addition to your scoping for the general public, does the county as a coordinating agency have any other standing?
And so the county, so the short answer is that to remain connected as the EIS proceeds, the counties that we pass through will be, March 17th, not, timeout, we don't talk to anybody until this draft EIS comes out. From a permitting perspective, I think there's a number of different factors of what the final design and the route would be that will basically guide and affect what pieces of the route and what areas of the project that the feedback would be solicited for.
Okay, I didn't understand that. Let me ask you some questions.
Yes, sir.
Do we fall into the category of having to work with us because of our requirements or because of the federal requirements saying you have to coordinate with the counties?
Let me get an answer back to you specifically on this so I don't give you
And
the wrong
also, to
answer.
add to that, does the size and diameter of the pipe make a difference as to how we have to coordinate back and forth, and also the PSI within that pipe?
The diameter of the pipe is definitely an element that falls in there. As far as the PSI goes, let me confirm that answer for you as well.
Where are you proposing the PSI to be on this pipe?
So we're still, next level of engineering we will come up with.
Do you have a
those
guess
final
as to
numbers.
the range?
It would be a guess, so I'll get back to you on that after we've kind of cleared into that next level of engineering, so I'm not putting out
What
the wrong
is the
numbers.
effect of the PSI? Why are you asking about the PSI?
When you have a breach, a lot more comes out quickly.
Well, the PSI can actually blow it against the wall, it's a low pressure.
And I don't think, compared to a natural gas pipeline, it might be a few hundred PSI, I don't know what you're gonna do.
Oh, no, you're much more higher than.
You think it's gonna,
10,000.
no.
No, it's,
When Chevron moved the pipeline next to us, they had, it's been 30 years, so excuse me, but I think they went from 1,000 PSI to 1,800 PSI. And that's what caused the problem in the pipe. Now, does that sound reasonable what I'm talking there?
that range, probably the lower end of that range is where the pressure would end up after next level.
Normally, that's what they would run it, is around 1,000 PSI.
That's correct.
Okay, so.
But that had a
higher
problem,
pressure than-
that had a problem with the other pipeline. See, there's two pipes there.
That's right.
And they had transferred the oil from one pipeline, from two pipelines into one pipeline.
Right.
They doubled the PSI to push it through, to
Yeah.
keep the refineries in oil.
Right.
And so when it blew on our property, I mean, it made quite a hole in the ground and shot in the air quite a while because it was 1,800 PSI. And one of the questions I have for you is, do the federal requirements mandate how often you put check valves in there? And the reason is where it blew, we had two mountain ranges on each side. And so when it blew, oil drained from both directions.
Right.
And in my opinion, to be wise, at the bottom of these valleys, you ought to have a check valve there, so if you do blow one way or another, you're not going to be draining both mountainsides
And absolutely, and so topography, elevation, sensitive areas,
Right.
those will be the considerations that are used to determine where the check valves go or where the block valves go.
Isolation valve.
That's right, the isolation valves and or check.
You also talked about putting the electricity on the outside of what you call the electrical strips or something like that.
So the heat tracing, and it's called surface, it's on the surface on the
How
outside.
do you guard against stray electricity on those? Because that's,
You mean electrolysis?
yeah, electrolysis and, okay. Let me tell you what I'm thinking of. I go down to IPP and some of the things that they were doing, they were putting electricity back in the ground, which in my opinion affected some of the neighbors over there. Especially animals are very affected on that stray electricity. Now, if that's the same as that electrolysis, then we're talking the same thing.
Electrolysis causes steel pipe to corrode.
That's
Right,
what,
that's right.
okay.
And that's a different issue, similar, but they have ways of grounding it and preventing it.
So with cathodic protection would be typically what's utilized. So, but to your initial question, the pipeline itself will have smaller diameter pipes attached, which is where the electrical will be inside of.
Oh, okay.
And then all of that will be insulated with 2 to 4 inches of insulation. So
And that insulation, I assume, will tend to be watertight. You want
It
to
will.
go away from the
absolutely,
pipe zone, or you're going to corrode the pipe.
that's correct. So watertight, and it's pretty innovative process of after everything's welded, then it's spun and blown, and it gets a very uniform insulation. It also gives you the water resistant properties.
Is
as well.
that installed? Go ahead.
So, Lisa,
Yes, sir.
you're taking notes on this, right? I mean, I would guess a lot of the questions that are being asked up here would probably be some of the questions we would want to submit as a county to Tesoro for inclusion.
I'm glad you forwarded this
Yeah.
one. So I do.
What is it, because this is, in your opinion now, maybe it's premature to ask this. You're asking basically the county, if you're going to need encroachment permits to count across county roads.
Right.
And if it's over a certain diameter, there may be a conditional use permit process.
Correct.
What other types of authorizations do you believe Summit County, that you would need from Summit County?
So I think, and again, I think that's going to go back, once we begin the right-of-way, the deeper dive on the right-of-way acquisition and where permits would be required as we do the permit research, right? There may be some that flow back in from that perspective, but I think, to your point, the conditional use permit and then where it's Summit County property, the ability to, to use that right-of-way across that easement, whatever, that happens to be, would be 2 key areas.
The other thing is if we built any of the tanks or valves above ground, we have to get a building permit too. I mean, those types of facilities.
Do you anticipate having quite a few above-grade structures?
So in the heat trace option, not a whole lot for a pipeline, of this length. On the displacement option, that would be where, if flow stopped, we would have tanks, about 4 different places along the line. We clear the waxy crude into that, it would be heated, stay heated until continuous flow could resume.
So what
So,
would they be?
pardon me, that'd be, directionally 20,000 barrels probably, above ground tanks,
Oh,
yeah.
These are 40-gallon barrels?
42 gallon barrels.
40-gallon barrels.
What is the diversion option?
The
Placement.
displacement?
Yeah, displacement.
So displacement, so the 2 options that we've narrowed it down to for dealing with flow stopping is the heat tracing, and the displacement is we would take the oil, the waxy crude oil, and move it out of the pipeline, because if you did the displacement, it would not be heated, but where you pushed it into would be heated tanks, so it would keep the oil liquefied until you can begin flow again.
So in a handful of places along the pipeline, you have these tanks.
And they estimated 4 locations? if you did
Four locations, plus the 5th location would be the end users in Salt Lake City.
that? And how big are the tanks be?
20,000.
We're actually 20,000 barrels.
So that's a pretty good size tank, 400,000 or 500,000 gallons.
That doesn't tell me how big it is. I don't know how big that
40
is.
gallons a barrel.
40,000 barrels.
Yeah, I don't know how big the tank is. Is it 40 feet tall? Is it huge?
It's
What is it?
big. It's really big.
Okay. Really big.
bigger than your screen.
It's bigger than a house. It's bigger than Roger's
You
house.
can't,
So
you
that'd be- You'd have 800,000 gallons.
About 800,000 gallons, that's right.
A million gallon, I have a million gallon reservoir that's 16 feet high and 100-foot diameter or something.
I've never been out. Tool.
No, I,
Chevron's got some of these things. I think somebody told me out in Kansas, they got pump stations, that's all right for the Chevron pipeline?
That's right, yeah.
And that building's 100 feet by 100 feet, and pretty tall, probably 15 feet tall.
Yeah, and we would have in either one of these cases, displacement or heat trace, there would be 4 or 5 pump stations along the right, the
In
route.
addition to the whole, if there's, in addition to the second scenario, to the whole thing.
That's right, but they, in the second scenario, they would most likely be co-located.
question I was asked to ask you by an outside source.
Yes, sir.
Is there, are you receiving any state funding for putting this pipeline through here?
We are not.
Not any wage, not economics, not anything such as that?
No way, shape, or form.
I thought that was the answer.
That's right. It's one of those, as we move forward, this is not a standard pipeline because of the technology and the terrain and that type of thing, right? It's an expensive pipeline. So as we continue our business case forward, if there may be economic value or shared value, but we have not had any conversations about that with anybody. Right now, we're just developing the base financial case for operating.
Okay, my next question is, Mr. Thomas, listen here. Because the pipeline is going through Summit County, what kind of taxes are we up against?
Well, it would be, you're looking at centrally assessed property.
No, you are.
Consequently, it's whatever the tax commission says as personal property tax. Because pipelines are personal property according to the state tax commission.
So they look at the 36 miles of the whole mileage, right? And they would take your share.
I haven't thought about that till we started talking
Right.
about that.
Chris, I got some questions.
okay. Roger, do you have more questions?
I do.
Go ahead.
How many pipelines does Tesoro currently operate?
Right now, currently, we acquired the Northwest product pipeline here in Salt Lake City from Chevron last year. We have the Tesoro High Plains pipeline system in North Dakota. And then with an acquisition of BP Southern California business, we've got pipelines, but they're more kind of in the LA industrial complex between facilities and marine facilities and that type of thing.
So this would be, I assume North Dakota probably rivals Summit County in terms of temperatures in the wintertime.
Yes.
But this will be the only high mountain, low temperature facility you guys operate?
This pipeline would be through the most mountainous terrain. As far as temperatures, you're right, the North Dakota environment's probably even harsher than at altitude.
And are those waxy crude pipelines?
They are not. The waxy crude is unique crude for Uinta Basin.
And how does that operate in this kind of environment where you have, we'll have certain days, not months worth, but certain days of extreme cold. What is the impact on waxy crude from that? Even when you've got the insulation and heat?
So as long as it stays above the pour point temperatures required, it would be zero impact. The pipeline would be a buried pipeline, and that would be at 4 to 6 feet below the frost line. So we're anticipating a fairly constant temperature in the pipeline, plus the insulation, and then there would be monitoring and metering. So we, if it was extended cold period and the temperature gradients shifted temporarily, then you could heat the pipe, the oil at the head of the pipe up to calculate and make sure you continue to have flow.
What are the most, you guys operate a number of pipelines. What are the most realistic hazards that you see? And one of the reasons I ask is that if you're allocated the preferred route, you're running down some of our most precious water courses. You're right beside the Beaver River, you're going right by Rockport, you don't quite get the echo what happens? What are we looking at? When you have a problem with the pipeline, what are those problems typically look like?
So typically the problems with the pipeline would be pumps and motors and flow type of issues, right? Just from an operability perspective. And traditionally, you're going to see that on systems where the asset's a little bit older. So for a brand new constructed pipeline, the pumps and motors would be brand new. Don't anticipate that that would be an issue for, any point in time. We've kind of had mean time between failure data, scheduled replacement programs, kind of the pipeline industry as far as how it's operating involved. That should be, no issue at that point. One drop of oil outside of the pipe is one drop too many. That's our operating philosophy. We take that very seriously. The biggest threat to pipelines in general are folks digging and not knowing exactly where they're digging, and they hit the pipeline, right? So that's communication, making sure it's well marked, making sure it's well, advertised, where to call, being responsive when those calls come in. The technology, keeping an eye on our flow rates and those overflights to see what's going on along the route are really the mitigation steps around what in the pipeline industry is the biggest threat, which is digging without proper marking and awareness of where the line is.
So the notion of waxing crude solidifying essentially at 95 degrees, or I think at the open house I went to, it said 90 degrees. So it sounds like a good concept, but you're heating this oil to 150, 175 degrees. It's running for 40 hours at that temperature before it gets for 135 miles. If there is a leak, I assume that oil will not immediately cool to ambient temperature. It's going to retain some of that heat. So what are we going to see in terms of a leak? I assume we're not going to get a coffee cup's worth of solidified oil. Are we getting 5,000 gallons before it cools at ambient temperature? What are we looking at?
So as far as, and I think it's not a great answer, but it's the right answer, is it depends, right? So it depends if, where it's at, what the temperature is. It's all around the properties of solidification and the thermal, degradation on the waxy crude oil. So
And how big the hole is.
well, true, right?
Well, there's also two more than that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but by you being a common carrier, in my opinion, you'll be putting a lot of different types of oil through that in order to break up or dilute the waxy crude.
No, sir. It'll be, and we did look at the diluent option as another technology. Just the properties of mixing. It's going to be either black waxy or yellow waxy.
And nothing else.
And that's it. Yes,
Okay.
sir. That's right.
Well, I'm sorry. This is going to sound like a suspicious question. I'll apologize for it in advance. Is there anything that's going to legally bind you to that?
Is there legally bind us
Bind you to
to
black
that?
and yellow waxes?
That's a great question. Our contracts will.
I only ask for a question.
Yeah. Touche. The contracts will be that those will be the two properties that we have on the product shipment, right? That's what the intent of the design of this pipeline is, to ship black wax and other wax.
But in your discovery of that kind of oil in the Uinta Basin,
It's not
you guys would be prepared to ship that if somebody...
Well, and we're sizing this pipeline for current demand and interest of waxy crude. We're not overbuilding capacity. The refineries have collectively invested hundreds of millions of dollars over the last few years to be able to run the waxy crude. If something else is discovered, the pipeline's going to be full with the waxy crude.
But Roger, over time, the waxy crude may play out in 20 years. There may be some other type of crude. You're going to, as good business people, you'll want to put the pipeline to use.
Maybe water at that time.
Water may be more valuable.
It could be, and so speculatively, we're calling this to be a waxy crude pipeline, but absolutely, sir.
So, all the underwriting on it needs to occur based on, what if it's not waxy crude. If for some, and if you put a hole in a pipe that's under 1200 PSI, and it's got 112, 115, 120 degrees Fahrenheit temperature, it's going to flow a lot of oil before it sets up. It's not going to be a thimbleful. It's going to, but when it does get in the atmosphere, especially if it gets any water, it's gonna set up immediately. So it's a different animal than, as long as it's the waxy crude, than you've had with the Chevron pipeline flooding up there, Red Butte, you know, going down Sugar House Park and things like that. It'd still be bad. I mean, so your questions as to what this are right on. I mean, it can happen. Best laid plans can go awry, and as this thing ages, you know, lots of things could happen.
Can I ask?
But you could also have a truck wipe out. I mean, there's a lot of other trade-offs.
I have four more questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Pressure we talked about, there's not really a fire risk, is there?
There's not a fire risk with crude. I mean, it's not a flammable material.
Okay. Cleanup, if you do get some, let's say 5,000 gallons runs out and into the Weaver River, what's the cleanup process for that?
What does the cleanup cost you for that?
Process.
Oh, the process for that. So our emergency response and you know, communication command control would kick in. And we've got folks locally in Salt Lake City that are prepared for both logistics and refinery response. And so that would be activated. It would be a joint kind of FEMA-NIMS process with EPA and the UDEC being involved with notifications that this is an activity we're responding to, and then we would follow the process through with that.
I'm trying to get more specific. Typically, what is the physical process of cleaning up the waxy crude smell from land and from water? How do you do that?
So it would be, I mean, the first step would be to contain, right? Second step would be to stop the leak immediately, and those are probably simultaneous steps. And then at that point, it would be an assessment to understand what is the situation and then what practices and techniques would be the right one to restore it to the condition it was in before that incident.
And I guess my concern about the Weaver River is it's almost a gauges, right? You've got two downhill sections, I think, coming before that. So a leak along the Weaver is going to, gravity is going to pull oil into the floor. You're going to have, will that necessitate more gates along that whole section? Valves, more valves on that?
So that is a design premise that is being reviewed, next level engineering of what needs to be in place and where for those types of things. Sensitive areas, water you know, areas, and elevation and terrain type of considerations.
I would be highly in favor of you guys finding someplace other than the Weaver River to run this thing. Right-of-way issues. Dave, I think we talked about this again with the family from Francis, where you've got the Chevron pipeline that's got, what is it, 20 feet on either side?
Yeah, I think it's 20 feet on each side.
And are you guys, is yours 100 feet?
So it's going to be an answer though, it depends. Conceptually, 100 is what you would look at for construction to make sure you have the right, you know, right of way.
Temporary.
Temporary, yes, sir. And then beyond that, and there's going to be, you know, terrain and constrictions will dictate. So it's not going to be a uniform number the entire length. Urban and rural is different, depending on where you are and what kind of physical restrictions or shear walls or that type of thing would also be part of what was.
I'm less concerned about what's happening in remote areas than I am through Democrat and some of the other places where the Chevron pipeline, you've already, in one case, there's a couple that I talked to, they've got the Chevron pipeline going to their property, so a piece of their property is taken up with that. This would add to that, their property would be substantially reduced. They've only got, I think, a couple hundred feet of frontage or something like that, so it's maybe 300 feet, so it would be a substantial burden on the property. So I think that's something we have to watch in terms of as this goes through. If it's parallel to the Chevron pipeline, it's going to add double burdens on some property owners. So if there are, Rick, if there are any property owners that are going to be affected by this, you might want to talk about that tomorrow, make sure that they provide adequate questions for the purpose of this EIS survey to find out whether the property is going to be affected if they've already got a pipeline on. And then I think my last question is community comments and questions. So they've got till March 17th to submit those questions, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And how is that done? How is that process accomplished? Where do they send those questions?
So
So it's on here, so on the comment sheet.
So there's a comment sheet, so there's multiple channels, right? The one place that will point you in all directions is you went to expresspipeline.com. And so then electronically, comments can be submitted to the Forest Service. It provides the physical address to mail written comments to the Forest Service. There's a fax number where comments can be faxed to the Forest Service. And then I think Cindy put out a comment card. The attendees to the open houses and the people along that proposed route that we sent out notices to the open houses, there was a follow-up comment card sent out so that they can write those comments, drop it in the mail, and it would go to the Forest Service for receipt and inclusion.
Okay, and are you from San Antonio?
I live in San Antonio
Can
now.
you take some home on Pheasants Farm?
I sure will. As long as I don't have to check another bag.
Aren't you the project
Any
manager?
other questions?
I'm on the project, I'm the project lead coordinator role. We've got, from a major capital project perspective, we've got another gentleman that's the project manager.
What's his name?
Jim Wentworth. He was at the open house as well.
Jim Wentworth?
Yes, sir.
Did he work on you now?
No, he did not. He's,
I know that name from somewhere.
I think he's probably a 20-year Tesoro employer there or not. So he's been probably with some of the refinery stuff.
You both comb your hair about the same way, don't you?
He's got a little longer hair than me.
So, you're gonna put the pipe to the top of the pipe 4 to 6 feet in the ground?
That's right.
And your standards right away where you have clean sailing and no obstructions in a rural area, permanent right away, what would you guess that's gonna be?
And I hate to guess, I think that's going to vary, and we haven't dug into that level of detail, and that's something that our right-of-way professionals will determine as we move forward on that.
Okay. Does anyone in the audience have any questions for Michael, Cindy, and Paul? Come up, Leslie, we're gonna wrap this up soon.
How,
I have some questions for you.
Okay.
how far away do you think you are from actually breaking dirt from today?
So right now with the EIS draft, everything being wrapped up, we're kind of targeting construction to begin in early 2016 to be completed by the end of 2016.
To be completed in 1 year?
In 1 year, we're planning to use multiple crews and try to complete the construction in a single season.
Okay, did you want
Sorry,
to?
one question. How do you, to bury this pipe 4 to 6 feet, how do you access, in particular, the remote areas and sensitive areas? What kind of equipment is going in there to actually dig the trenches with the sand?
So it would be, pipeline trenching equipment that would get into those areas. That would be part of the EIS as well. If there are areas that are either inaccessible or that, are roadless areas, we'd have to work out special use permits to work through those segments of the route.
Would you remediate the land once you went in there, replant trees, do whatever you do?
So we would remediate the land. We would not replant trees because we have to leave that pipeline right away clear so we don't have roots growing down into the pipeline itself.
So
So
you can cut roads in and things like that. Some of those you may have to leave to service the pipeline, right?
that's right, yes, sir.
Okay, would you come up, please?
Just want to pursue shots, step over and stuff.
No, you're all right, you can sit and use this microphone.
Hi, my name is Carly Farrell. I just have a question about the energy for the above ground and the pumps and things like that. Do you guys have to build a whole other transmission line for that? Where are you getting that kind of energy? Will that be incorporated in the drafting, I guess, or will that be a whole other kind of?
Sure, so the concept right now is still being developed as the right-of-way is informed. At the origin and the destination, we're planning to have primary power via the grid and electrical service. Obviously, we need backup generation in the event that we lose primary power for the sensitivity of the product in the pipeline. Along the route, we're still exploring what those options would be. If there was electrical service available, we would look to utilize that. Where electrical service isn't available, the majority of this route, we feel like we would have access to natural gas, and we would use a generator set to create the electricity for the pipeline.
I got a 44,000 volt crossing me, you just typed into that, and I'm not sure.
If we can, where we can get on the utility, that's definitely the preferred primary electric, along the route.
Okay, Leslie, Bob, Pat,
I have a question.
Lisa,
You can hear me, right? I don't need to get
this is Leslie Crawford, our county engineer.
Is that you were describing the pipe? I just have a question about secondary containment and your displacement tanks or your heat trace. Before you recognize there's a leak, there's a chance that a lot of stuff is going to leak into the water, and this supplies a bunch of our water supply. How is the pipe secondary contained all the way, or how is that going to be handled?
Sure. Can I look at Leslie or should I talk to you?
Either way, just so we can actually in the microphone.
I'll step over here so I can respect, the question back to you. So from the above ground storage tanks for that displacement methodology, secondary containment and berms, the normal, requirements for above ground storage tanks would be maintained. For the pipeline itself, there's not a designed secondary containment for the whole length of the pipeline. But that's standard in the pipeline industry. That's not, I don't think you're going to find secondary containment on the length of any pipeline in the United States.
Can I have a follow-up question?
Sure.
So how long is the response time? If the sensors go off at 1 drop of oil between each sensing station, what's the response time to get there?
And that's going to be another it depends question. It depends on where there is and the terrain and how we would get into that area, right? So that there's not, it would be an immediate reaction to go explore. As far as what time it takes to get there, there's more variables that I really couldn't give you. Just there's a standard answer to that question.
Maybe talk about how quickly the valves would close on that, or remotely controlled.
Say that again, Cindy.
Yeah.
The valves, how quickly they can be shut down or remotely controlled.
I think, Leslie, part of our input may be that we review the location of your isolation valves and that we acquire additional ones if we think that there aren't enough in the right places. And then we also investigate I assume you have telemetry so you can remotely shut, open and close valves.
Yeah.
And that you have sensors so that when you see something out of whack, you can immediately start to shut down and isolate.
That's correct. And it's not just the valves. All the pumps and motors are also remotely activated. So the response time, and I interpreted that, Leslie, as kind of a person being in that area. As far as the response time for being able to shut down pumps, motors, and remotely actuated valves, that's typically in a minute or
so. Along our water courses, we may require, or at least suggest an EIS,
Yes.
try to do things to acquire additional safeguards.
And that's right. Those are the types of comments and feedback we're looking for. And in our initial designs, those sensitive areas are areas that we're looking for the remote activated valves to be in place.
Lisa Yoder has a question, then Carly. Carly, is it?
Yes, I wanted to ask, do you know if in the case where there's a conservation easement on property and the pipeline would pass through that property, what kind of, who has priority when there's a conservation easement?
Well, I'm not sure if you've got an answer. We would have to look into that answer. I've not had that question. And we're not at that level of detail for right-of-way specifics yet.
Some conservation easements allow underground utilities. Depends on the text, and then if they're silent on it, then it's a matter of, you can condemn the right of way. It's just a question, now you've got a higher level of.
There's a balancing of interests
Right.
and it's a case-by-case basis, and you make your argument, and conservation folks would make their argument, and ultimately, one of them's gonna win, and one of them's gonna lose.
Well, we hope it doesn't come to that, right? We're looking for a collaborative, mutually acceptable solution between the project and the landowners that will be passing through their property.
Thank you.
Okay, Carly,
And then with the heating of the pipes, with the heating being so extensive and for such a long period of time, how do you safeguard the soils and the kind of environments that insects and things that other animals depend on?
So, and that's all part of the EIS study. So the temperature, the heat, the specific area of the route that the line's passing through, all of that will be environmental and paleontological studies will all be done and will be used to answer those questions for specific areas along the route.
Josh Mann.
Yeah, Josh Mann, I had a question about earthquake events. What level of an earthquake damages the pipeline? And if, an earthquake affected 30, 40 miles, it could affect the entire pipeline. So what safeguards are in place to stop from a major catastrophe happening?
So we're aware of the fault lines, and that's going to, so again, early stages engineering, we're not to that level yet, but the seismic response and along the fault lines, how that will be designed for place shift, vertical changes, that's all to be designed into the pipeline as we continue into detailed engineering.
They flex.
There's some amount of flex, and that's preliminary where we are now. That's probably 2 levels of engineering further that we would look at.
One last question for me.
Yes, sir.
Will your electric strips along the outside of the pipe, are they big enough, can you produce enough heat from them that if something were to stimulate that oil, that it will keep that oil warm? And let me continue going.
But could you repeat that one time, because I don't think I followed the question.
Okay, let me give you a complete summary.
Okay.
One of the problems that Chevron Oil had on at least 2 or 3 different occasions is that we had at least 2 to 3 feet of snow out here, in Camas in the valley floor.
Okay.
And then this time of year, mid-February, this time of year, we had a day or a day and a half of straight rain. And it melted all of that snow and the rain right into the ground. Everything was clockwork. And it dropped the temperature of that oil probably 30 to 40 degrees in a matter of 12 hours. And it plugged those off twice. And that's why I'm asking, will your electronic strips, are they big enough, will they produce enough heat to stop that from happening in a matter of 12 to 24 hours when you have that kind of downflow of cold water come around and be around that pipe?
Right, so they will be designed with the terrain and the spring, flow and water saturation in mind, yes.
Because that water will only be about 30 degrees.
2 degrees above freezing, right?
Yeah.
Right. And there, the next level of engineering, we're intending to do bench testing where we actually take a real line and do a number of different things to get the test data to understand the properties and how that will
It
react.
will happen too.
Right.
And it'll be very expensive to apply.
That's correct.
Are there any other questions from the council, from the staff, legal counsel, from the audience, from our media?
I guess I'll ask a question.
Aaron?
Yeah.
Park record?
Yeah, I mean,
For the
I
short
think I tried to answer this before, it's eminent domain, would that factor into it at all? Who would decide that if push came to shove and that would happen?
So we really hope that doesn't happen. We're looking for mutually agreeable, decisions between the project and landowners. If that was a situation, then Utah code does make reference for that, and we'd have to look at that on a case-by-case basis if that came to be a situation, but we really hope that it doesn't get to that.
Okay. I think we're gonna, on that note, thank Paul, Cindy, Michael for coming, taking as much time as you have. Very helpful. And I'm sure we'll be engaging on this both before the 17th and after through completion. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate the opportunity and the council's time and everybody that turned out tonight and to ask questions and have the conversation. Look forward to continuing to work together as this project progresses. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cindy, what were you doing in Tooele County when we crossed paths? UNAP, oh, that